Hello, Historical Faith Society. Today we're very excited to talk about archaeological challenges, the Bible, and political unrest. And today I have four guests I'm very excited to have. Dr. Scott Stripling, who we've had on this month with his digs at Shiloh. We have Dr. Marcela Zapata-Meza, right? And we have Dr. Mark Jenkins, and we have Dr. Seth Rodriguez. So thank you all for being a part of this panel discussion. So my first question, and I think we'll just have to go around the horn here, and I'm going to start with Mark. Mark, what deceased archaeologist had the greatest impact on you and why?
I think Albright, Foxwell Albright probably had the most influence. I mean, as far as I don't think there's ever been anyone else like him. I mean, he had his feet in several different disciplines. He was a biblical scholar. He was a linguist. He was an archaeologist, and he was just like the full package. And that's part of the difficulty I think that we have in our field today, is that there's nobody like him. There's nobody that can do all of it. But certainly, he was one of the main ones that I say has an influence on me.
Marcela.
I have, for me, the most important archaeologist influences is Dr. Linda Manzanilla here in Mexico. That she is the most important archaeologist to make more interdisciplinary work in archaeology. He's a pioneer in all of this kind of work, and for me, she is my most influence in archaeology.
Okay, and is she still living?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He works in Teotihuacan here in Mexico.
Okay. Well, we'll let you give a living one. So I'm gonna ask Seth. I'm going to go back to the deceased archaeologist, someone from the past. Anyone come to mind for you?
Well, Mark already took mine. W.F. Albright, and obviously very influential in the field for his influence echoing all the way to present time. For me, though, I'm going to say Albright because his library was donated to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary where I did my doctoral work. And so several of the library books I checked out over my years there doing my doctoral work were signed by W.F. Albright. In fact, sometimes I had a choice. They had, a couple different copies. I would always go for the Albright copy, just knowing that I was looking at the same book that he used during his time.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a real connection to history. I've had that experience too in the past when I've gone to different libraries in England and held the very book that famous archaeologists had worked with. I can see their notes and everything. So that's very, very fun to have. Okay, Dr. Scott Stripling, let's hear who you have. Is it going to be a triple here or not?
We stand on the shoulders of giants. We have in our library here at the Bible Seminary Trudy Dauphin's collection. Trudy lived in her mid-90s and was a giant in the field of Philistine research. But I would say my primary focus, I could not dispute Albright, but Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie was just a brilliant guy. And he's the first one who established stratigraphy and was able to establish a ceramic typology. He understood ancient languages, and he did so much. And I think you've brought some of it out in your films in the past, Tim, but Petrie would be my go-to guy.
Is when you read some of these scholars from the 1800s and you read the technical information that they're understanding. I think, Mark, when you talked about the different disciplines that people were involved with, it's just amazing that they knew as much as they did on geography and on pottery and on language and the different languages that they knew. There was just a level of intelligence, I think, that was so impressive. So, three of you, how many speak Spanish here? Because I know there's a Spanish connection.
I speak Spanish.
Me and Marcela.
Right. Can you comment on the impact of Spanish-speaking archaeologists on archaeology in the southern Levant?
In English or in Spanish?
Well, I would like you to tell us in a Spanish-speaking archaeologist, but I would like you to give the answer in English.
I think we are a few people in the Levant or in Galilee or in Israel working in archaeology. I think some of the population in Israel speaking Spanish, but they are not archaeologists. And I think the Spanish people that work in Israel is a few, is not much. And in fact, we are the only Mexican archaeologists that we are working since 2010 in Magdala, in Galilee. And I think it's very important that the Mexican or Spanish community have a representation in this kind of discipline, and of course, this kind of research in archaeology.
Scott, what are your thoughts on the Spanish?
I think it's so exciting, and I admire the work that Marcela is doing at Magdala. I've, over the last decade, I've been there probably twice a year, just watching the progress and now getting to know her personally. This is one of the reasons that she and I, along with Noe Marcos Pool, who's one of the leading Mayan experts, and he's part of our dig team at Shiloh, talk about interdisciplinary. It's fascinating to blend those understandings. But this conference that we had down in Merida was to bring in these students from Latin America, Mexico primarily, and to show them, hey, you can influence the whole world. If you're interested in the Southern Levant, then you can do it from right where you are. And so, of course, when they hear people speaking their language, and we have people visiting Shiloh daily that are Spanish speakers, their eyes always light up.
Well, let's just talk about this term and comfortableness of it, biblical archaeology. Are you comfortable or not comfortable with the term biblical archaeology? So let's start with Mark.
Yeah, I'm absolutely comfortable with being called a biblical archaeologist. Through the 80s and 90s, it was very unpopular to be considered a biblical archaeologist. There was this kind of whole thing against biblical minimalists, biblical maximalists. These terms were being thrown around. I think, though, that you're starting to see, especially among Israeli archaeologists, that there's kind of a growing acceptance again, where they are at least embracing the biblical material. I don't know if you're familiar with an article by Aaron Meyer called "Bones, Stones, and Relevance," where he unashamedly, embraces the fact that he is a biblical archaeologist. He's an archaeologist that deals with digs in biblical lands, and it ties into the narrative of the Bible, so very comfortable. Yes.
Right. I've interviewed William Deaver, at times, and he was like the guy who declared that biblical archaeology was dead, or whatever. Well, anyway, that's another story. That's another part to this whole thing, because you don't realize that if you can criticize the Bible continually by being a minimalist or whatever and not looking for the patterns, it's really about interpretation, isn't it? So let's ask Seth. Seth, are you comfortable with this label?
Yes, I am. It's a good thing, because my title here at Colorado Christian University is actually Assistant Professor of Old Testament and Biblical Archaeology. So yes, I'm quite comfortable with it. Archaeology is a huge field that goes across the globe. And so you need, you need a label that limits it somehow. So you have North American archaeology, South American archaeology, European archaeology. And so biblical archaeology really just means that we focus on the time periods of the Bible and the geographic regions of the Bible. And so really there's no reason to throw that label out. Marcela,
do you feel comfortable with the term biblical archaeology or not?
I am not sure about it. I have in my mind a personal discuss about the biblical archaeology or archaeology of the land of the Bible. I am not sure about which is the correct way, but because also if we work in Israel, in Egypt, in all of the areas of the geography that is part of the Bible, we are doing archaeology, or not necessary biblical archaeology, because maybe different events and different chronologies are involved, and not just in the Bible time. But I think it's very important to make different in the work. If we are working, for example, we are working in Magdala, that is obvious site or settlement that is part of the biblical history in the New Testament. We need to be very precisely about our interpretation and not confuse the science with the faith. Is not because it's controversial or is separate away, but I think we need to be very scientific and to give our interpretation objective with all the evidence, and not to suppose some history in the Bible and to force the evidence in the Bible and the archaeology. But for me, it's very important to try to understand the biblical archaeology or the land of the archaeology geography.
Yeah, so I see the difference there, biblical archaeology or archaeology in the land of the Bible. And I would think that pretty much that is the rule of which, as I've gotten to know these different men and in their approach to archaeology, especially with what I've known Scott Stripling much longer here. Why don't you talk about that? Because I know that the science that you're using is a rigor towards it. But I think the thing that I've seen is that there's been a biased or a negative interpretation, almost guilty before even being heard when it comes to things of biblical events. So, Dr. Scott, how would you respond to that? Biblical archaeology or digging in the land of the Bible?
Well, they're both right. We have reacted against that presuppositionalism that had come at some of us who were believers, like we could not use the Bible. Well, wait a minute, we can use Mesopotamian literature, we can use Egyptian literature, but we can't use the biblical literature. And when we've got a site like Shiloh or Magdala, I mean, it's the Bible that gives us it's the primary source for those places. What we try to do is to create a hypothesis, and then we're going to test it scientifically. For example, my hypothesis in 2019 was that the destruction layer that came from a sealed locus at Shiloh would date to about 1075 BC, because that's when I surmised that the tabernacle would have been come to an end, the tabernacle culture. And if the Philistines did destroy Shiloh, it would have dated to that time period. Well, the pottery that we got out from underneath this floor and the carbon dating both pointed exactly to that 1075 date. So in that case, our hypothesis was tested scientifically and turned out to be correct. And so none of us would want to try to make the evidence say something that it doesn't say. But I think we do have to stand up and say that the Bible is often our go-to source, because like at Shiloh, it's not mentioned in any other source outside the Bible.
What new technology has been the greatest potential to impact how archaeology is going to be done in the future? I don't know who wants to jump out here, but what should I throw out? I'm going to pick on Seth.
Yeah, the last few seasons I've been involved at Telesafi, Biblical Gath, and one of the things that they used there was like ground penetrating radar that kind of measured the magnetic fields, and that identified certain places where destruction was particularly violent, and excuse me, kind of reoriented the magnetic field in that area. Sure enough, when we dug there, then we found significant remains that otherwise would have just been it would have been kind of random as far as where we were digging. It's just a kind of a big wide open field. Okay, where do we kind of focus our resources? And the results of that ground penetrating radar kind of revealed where we should be focusing, and really kind of made the excavation more efficient as far as where we were targeting.
Yeah, ground penetrating radar, I think, is fascinating. I mean, that would be quite the tool to be able to use. And just a quick question: how difficult is it to do ground penetrating radar?
We've used it twice, and it's not as simple as it sounds at all. In the hill country, especially. So I would say down by the Sea of Galilee, it would be easier to use. And I think they did at El Arraj use it. I don't know if you did at Magdala, but in the hill country, you did?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll let Marcela speak to that. But in my experiences in the hill country were very mixed because of all the heavy tumble and stone that we have. Like in Egypt, when you've got sand, I mean, ground penetrating radar is beautiful. I mean, it can show you exactly what you have. But with us, we sort of in the hill country tend to get a mixed message, which means we have to excavate anyway.
Because
I'd like to hear what Marcela has to say.
Yeah, there's just so many boulders in the hill country, right? It's just a tangle of everything. So Marcela, tell us about ground penetrating radar.
In Magdala, it was very easy to use the ground penetration because the landscape is plain. We don't have a lot of vegetation. We don't have mountains. It's just a plain, complete area, and was very easy to use the ground penetration. In some areas, for example, in the excavated areas, that we want to know more about the information earliest to the basalt floor, is a little bit more difficult. But in fact, in Magdala was very easy to use the ground penetration. Also, we used in 2010 the resistivity electricity. And I think the most important in this moment technology is the LiDAR, that is more give more precisely information in areas that is complete surround with vegetation. For example, here in Mexico, in the Maya area, is a very useful, the LiDAR. But in Magdala, it's not necessary to use this kind of technology because we don't have a lot of vegetation. It's a plain geography, and the radar penetration was very useful and gave for us very interesting information to have our goals in which area we want to excavate it, in which dimension, and it was very precisely for us.
Right, because you only have so much time to really be at a dig site. And so if you can narrow that down by not digging, like someone who's drilling for oil, a dry well, you need to get to the place where you're going to find artifacts sooner than later, right? So ground penetrating radar is one. Mark, do you have anything that you would say is a breakthrough for the future?
Well, I think today at the dig site, it's very interdisciplinary. I know that at my years at Gath, I know that the Weitzman Institute was there, and they were experts in flora and fauna who were doing their investigations right there on site. I know that at Shiloh, we collect bones, we collect seeds, we collect all of these different sorts of materials that can be sent to labs and investigated that tell us a lot about the kind of animals that they ate, the kind of vegetation that grew in the area. We just have a lot more information available to us now than we have in the past.
Well, I'm biting my tongue. Wet sifting is no doubt the huge wave of the future. And what we have done at Shiloh is to bring wholesale wet sifting into the field so that we're sifting it in situ. We know exactly where it came from, and we're doing 100% of the site. And it's revolutionary because in the past, archaeologists and the present unfortunately, are missing about 75% of the small finds. And I know this because we've gone back to old dump piles from the 1980s. And when we wet sifted them, we found, for every one scarab they found, we found 4. For every one bula they found, we found 4. Beads, seal impressions, the glyptic remains that are so helpful for dating a particular stratum are being thrown away in most excavations, not intentionally, of course. So dry sifting is important, but when you wet sift, it changes everything. And so I've begun to publish the results of that now. I'm beginning to speak on that at conferences. I'm writing papers about it because I want my colleagues to know how revolutionary this is. So that's what's got me excited.
Right. Okay. So summarizing, ground penetrating radar, and wet sifting. One is to find the locations when you can, find the locations quickly, so that because of the expense of a dig site, and then the other thing that I also take away from Mark, which I see when I read the writings of some of the earlier scholars, is they were multidisciplined people. They had a knowledge of a number of things, and it was impressive to realize how well versed they were, in so many different categories. I think that Benjamin Franklin, it was be a jack of all trades, and it was master of none. But actually, I think what he actually said was be a jack of all trades and master of one. I think the none was put in there as sort of a joke, but I do think that in many cases, I know even in making films, I have become a jack of many trades and trying to be a master of one. And I think that is what I'm seeing with the archaeology, is that there are nuances that you're looking for that you have to be sensitive to in order to basically say, hey, there's a pattern of evidence here, and it's interconnected, right? Because material culture is interconnected with a lot of different pieces of information. Okay, so let's talk about funding. Is funding the greatest obstacle that you deal with when it comes to your archaeology? Or is it the digging? Or what is it? What's the greatest obstacle that you're dealing with?
Well, I think it's money. Money solves almost all of our problems. We can hire the laborers, we can have the right equipment, we can do the scientific analysis that we need. So it's volunteers and money are the two main things. I mean, assuming you got the right permissions and right protocols and right trainings, it's money is a big limiting factor. When I talk to people about wet sifting, what they usually tell me is, well, but it costs money and it takes time. And this is the primary objection that you'll hear.
Yeah. Marcela.
The money and that we are in Mexico, and to travel to Israel is not easy and is not cheap for us. But I think the most important or the most difficult aspect is the money. The volunteers, fortunately for us, is not a difficult issue. But all the time when the people ask me about how we work in Magdala, I say, with the generosity of the people, because we have just a work, or we work just with the generosity of the people that want to give for us some money to continue with excavation. And I am archaeology. I don't know how to ask for the people to give for us money. My only way to get money is with the writing, to do a very well work and to show the people the Magdala history. But the most difficult issue, for sure, is the money.
Okay. All right. Well, Seth, your turn.
There's a verse in Ecclesiastes that mentions that, Scott. I'm trying to, I'll pull it up for you and send it to you. But the money is the solution to all problems, basically, is kind of the gist of it. But for me, I would say the pandemic over the last year has been the biggest obstacle that every excavation has had to to overcome. As you know, the coronavirus pandemic just shut down pretty much all digs last summer. Digs this summer are it's a challenge to get people to even get into the country, and so over the last over the short term, over the last year or so, it's been just the health crisis that we've been going through.
Yeah. Okay. How about obviously the political issues, but Israel's always involved at different times with political unrest. Has that been a factor for any of you?
Well, I was there in 2014 digging at Safi, and I can still remember it like it was yesterday. We were second week of excavation, Monday afternoon. We're sitting at a lecture, 6 o'clock, and we hear the air raid sirens go off for the first time, which was quite surreal. It's it was very unsettling. There's no doubt about that. It seems like to me that it's even more accelerated this time around than it was when we were there. I know that we felt safe. I did have to send the only student I had that summer. I had to send home, and her parents wanted her to come home, so I took her to the airport, and I went ahead and stayed. But it's interesting because every day in class, the cost issue, by the way, going back to that, even at the institutional level, it's difficult to get the administration involved in what I'm doing. It's usually I'm biting my nails at the end of the year to see if they're going to come through with funds to send me. But certainly for the students, I might have numerous students that might come to an initial meeting, let's say 15, and out of that, usually 2 or 3 will actually be able to come up with the funds. But having said that, how I would tie that into this is that I do have a couple of videos from 2014 of the Iron Dome, and usually when I show those, I seem to have a lot more interest. I don't know if it's just because they want the danger with the Indiana Jones thing or what it is, but it can be quite unsettling.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'll chime in with another story. So I was digging at Tel Hatzor in 2006. It was supposed to be a 6-week season, ended up being a 2.5-week season because right about that point, we were about 5 miles from the Lebanese border, and the Hezbollah started shooting rockets over into Israel. And yeah, the season was cut short because the army was called up, including some people on our dig. And so we were on site one morning and heard explosions off in the direction of Lebanon. Clearly there was hostilities happening and rockets were being fired. And then we heard 2 explosions on the other side of us. And so the rockets were actually going over our heads and landing in the fields beyond. And so the staff quietly kind of evacuated us and moved us down to Tiberias and eventually down to Jerusalem. But that was the end of the season that year.
Yeah. Well, sounds like a real good recruiting video for volunteers, right?
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Makes for interesting stories anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, but it's interesting also. I think for the students, I was also in 2014, and I think for the students is difficult. They experience the experiences that they have panic with the Iron Dome and all of the situation. So I think the student that stayed with me in 2014, now they have a different view about Israel, about the situation in the world, and also they are more, they know that they are people that have the opportunity to see the reality in this country, and I think this is very important. I don't say that this a good experience, no, but they have more idea about the reality in all of these countries that have different problems, political, religious, I don't know, but I think they are more open point of view about this situation.
Let's talk a little bit about this coming dig this year, and how confident are you that you'll be able to dig?
In Magdala, no, we don't have expectation for this summer. Unfortunately, for the pandemic, this year is closed. Possible the next year, 2022, we have a conservation season. And we are give all the effort for 2023, and we think this is our year to continue with the excavation in Magdala. But this year and the next year, we can't to continue.
Now, Scott, tell me about what your plan is.
Well, as the eternal optimist, we've been moving forward under the assumption that we're going to excavate, and I think we are. Got really good news this morning out of Israel that July 1st has now been announced as when individual tourists can come in. And so our dig is supposed to launch on July 5th this year. So that may be, we pushed it to the end of the summer to help us, and it looks like that may save our season. It also looks like the current chaos is going to come to an end in the next 24 to 48 hours and should subside. So we're planning, we have a large group signed up, but we've got people registering every day and dropping out every day. And so normally I would be very anal about planning who's doing what. And this year I'm just going to wait and see who actually gets there.
Let's talk a little bit about a couple last questions here as we wrap it up. Is there a bias against archaeologists who have, let's say, Christian faith, who believe in the historical reliability of the Bible? Do you think there's any kind of bias that you experience or that you feel?
Well, there is some that exist, but I think that much of that can be overstated too. If we do excellent work, then we're going to find wide acceptance. And so my emphasis has always been on doing great archaeology and publishing on meeting the deadlines and publishing in peer-reviewed journals and being interdisciplinary and building a very inclusive team. Then I think you do find wide. And like in our publications, I'll have co-authors that are from different Israeli universities and other universities. And so it's not just like, well, I'm saying this because I'm a Bible believer or something like that. I mean, this is a fact. It's well established. We've taken it through the peer review process. We've done it very scientifically. And here's the evidence that we have found. Having said all that, there still does exist some bias in some people that they kind of have the idea that if you happen to take the Bible as a reliable historical document, that you are a Neanderthal or something like that. And that's clearly not the case.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I know that Seth might be able to echo this a little bit. There's a difference between being at a Christian dig and being at an Israeli dig, for certain. And certainly I know when I dug at Tel Safi, the Christians that were there, out of say the 150 staff members, probably represented maybe 10%, and there were numerous Israeli nationals who dug there. And quite often, especially there are other professors from other secular universities who are there who make a judgment if they know that you're from an evangelical school, that you are part of one of these biblical minimalists. And it seems to me always a challenge. Again, as Scott was just saying, you have to show yourself to be very efficient and very scientific and thorough in what you do and essentially try to work within those parameters, and I willingly admit that at times, I keep my cards pretty close to my chest as far as what I believed and what I thought. But having said that there were certainly people there who were like-minded, and we would certainly discuss the things that we thought was happening there.
I think the evidence speak about the common life, about the history. And I think the Bible is a very important sources, and I think that the faith also is important, but the archaeology need to be very objective and to use, as Scott say, the interdisciplinary work. And with this kind of integration of different areas, we can to give more objective and precisely approximation of the past, of the history, and in different cities or settlement that we are working. And for example, in Magdala, the pilgrims ask me about really in this street walking, Jesus walking, and I say, I am not sure. I don't have evidence about it, but if we are working in a settlement that this chronology of the time of Jesus Maybe he walking in this street, but we don't have the evidence. We need to be very precisely and objective with our interpretation, and also with information that we give for the people to visit us, or the people that it is very interesting in to know more about the place that we are working in. More it is biblical area, biblical land, that it, I think, is very important to be very objective.
Okay. And Seth.
Yeah, so I'll just build on what Mark said. Yeah, my experience has been both at Tel Hatzor and at Tel Asafi. Both of those are Israeli digs I've been involved in. There's definitely an openness to having Christians there. And again, if you show up and you work hard and you're sober and you're on time, they definitely will welcome you with open arms. And really, my message to this audience would be, it's a really great opportunity, actually, when you're digging in the land of the Bible with people from this international team, people from Australia and Europe and North America, South America. You have a great opportunity to build relationships with others from other cultures who may not have ever met a Christian before. And there's a natural curiosity, since you're digging in a biblical site, in biblical periods. There's conversations about the Bible happening for that entire 3, 4, 6 weeks that you're there. And it's led to great opportunities, really, for Christians to share what we believe about the Bible and about God and about Jesus Christ.
You are all university professors, and my one of my last questions here is, what are your students asking you? Because they know what you're doing. What are some of the questions that students might be asking you as they're looking for maybe guidance or direction in their own life when it comes to the type of work that you're doing? Is there any common questions that you hear? Marcela, we'll start with you.
My students all the time ask me, how can I go to Israel and to help in Magdala? But they are very interested to work with us in Magdala. But the most important question that they have is the difference between the Christian and the Jewish community, if we have evidence in Magdala about the difference with the Jewish common life or Christian common life. They are very interested to know if the archaeology give information about the difference in the first century in the Jewish community or in the Christian community. They are very interested in this kind of issue. They are not interested, for example, if Jesus or Mary Magdalene was in Magdala. They are more interested in the Christians and the Jewish communities in the first century and the common life. But the most important for my student is how I can to work in Magdala, how I can to get the money, how I can to pay my travel. All of these issues, economic issues for my student here in Mexico are very important. But they have more historical question about the difference between the Christians and the Jewish community, if they coexist in Magdala or not.
One question I get is actually about Jericho. One of the classes that we teach here is interpreting the Bible, and one of the textbooks that we use in that class, the 4 views on biblical inerrancy. That's one of the questions that's asked of the different viewpoints, is the evidence for destruction of Jericho at the time of Joshua. So because we have the students read that book, then there's kind of a natural question comes to me is, okay, like what do we think about this from an evangelical viewpoint? And so I lean heavily on the work by Brian Wood and the socio-biblical research for my answer to that. So yeah, a lot of it is how do we reconcile as Christians the evidence from archaeology to what we believe about the Bible, and with this high view of Scripture that yes, this is the Word of God, and this is a historically accurate document. How do we kind of bring those two things together and harmonize things is a pretty common question I get.
Well, I would think that probably the most common question that I used to get when I dug at Tel Assaf Gath was, "Have we ever found any big bones or big houses?" Because Goliath is from Gath, you know. But I don't know. I find that you know, I teach at a liberal arts university, and of course, Bible classes are required. And I'm just pleased to get any sort of question that is thoughtful, whether it's related to archaeology or not. I think that most students have the impression, most common question outside of that might be, does archaeology prove the Bible, or how does archaeology prove the Bible, which is a very difficult question to answer, because really, you know, what kind of things can you find? I often say this, by the way, to my students, that it is so rare that you can go somewhere in Israel and go to a place and say, this is exactly what the Bible was talking about. You know, say like the Pool of Siloam there in Jerusalem. A few years ago, they found the corner of the first century Pool of Siloam right there at the foot of the city of David. You know, this is one of the few places you could say Jesus was probably right here, if not touching this pavement. But it's to try to, you know, educate them and showing them that really what archaeology does is it enlightens us as to the nature of the biblical period, how they lived, you know, what kind of occupations, what kind of foods, you know, all of these sorts of questions that we might have that might enlighten it. But when we do find something that does overlap with something that we can, you know, relate to the Bible, then that's always a big thing, and I make a big thing of it. So that's what I would say.
Scott, you get the cleanup batter here.
Okay. Well, the term I would use is illumination. The archaeology illuminates the text. It doesn't change it. It doesn't interpret it, but it does set it in a context many times where we can understand what it meant to them then and there before we bring it into the here and now. But my students often ask me when we're studying ceramic typology, like I've got students coming in tomorrow and we'll be working with pottery all day. And so when they see me take pottery and then separate it into the different time periods, it seems like magic to them. And as I am able to teach them the diagnostic features, the indicative features of the pottery, all the things that we're looking for that empower us to date it, because pottery is still our primary means of dating at an archaeological site. That's a very common question that they ask. Like, how do you do that? Because it seems like magic. It's almost like cracking a code or something like that. So a lot of curiosity, and I get a lot of pleasure out of teaching them how to read the pottery.
Why does archaeology matter? And if you could keep it under a minute, that would be great. So, Marcela, I'm going to give you the first chance on that.
I think the archaeology is matter for because it is can't connect different disciplines. This is for me the most important of the archaeology.
Okay. All right, Seth, you're in.
Well, my academic answer to that would be that it, as we've mentioned before, even in this interview, that it, like Scott's word, it illuminates the world of the Bible. It tells us things that the Bible assumes you already know, sometimes, as far as like, what does a house look like, or what does a city look like in biblical times, which is very different from our modern context. So that's my academic answer. My more personal answer is archaeology matters. And the reason I fell in love with archaeology is just it brings home the reality of the Bible, that this is a real book about real people who had real problems and had to trust in a real God and exercise real faith and trust that God was going to answer them and help them through their situations. And so making that connection for my students of, hey, these are not just stories, these are real stories. And just like God came through for the people in the Bible, God can come through for you. Just as real as the person that made this piece of pottery, that is how real these stories in the Bible are. And they didn't know how their story ended. We didn't know how our stories are going to end. And so it helps people, I think, to kind of connect even more closely with the Bible, to inspire further and strengthen their faith in the Bible and in the God who wrote the Bible.
Mark.
Yes, I always tell my students in my daily pleas to come dig with me that if you come and dig, if you come to Israel, you'll never read the Bible in the same way. I mean, there'll be this visual context to everything that you read. And again, on a more personal level, I would certainly echo what Seth was saying there too. It's just something that gets in your blood. The first time you go, either you get it or you don't get it. But it's like digging up this piece of pottery that is a piece of Philistine pottery, or something that was there during the Middle Bronze Age in Shiloh during Abraham's time. Just knowing that there was a culture 3,000 years ago that touched this, and that these were living people. And when the Bible talks about these people, they were a reality, so it's very mystical.
Well, I would say that the larger existential questions that we all have, who am I? What is my purpose? Why am I here? Where am I going? Archaeology is a means by which we can speak to those things in a real way, by tapping into our past and understanding our roots, where we came from, and then we can maybe get perspective on where we are and on where we're going. The history of it is super fascinating and important, because this is maybe the only area that you actually can do original research that is going to affect how history is understood. Many times we're dealing with mythologies, but in archaeology, we can go a step beyond that in material culture that can clarify what our past looked like and give us perspective on the present, and then hopefully also for the future.
Well, thank you. I know the Bible tells us that God has appointed a time and a place for us to live. And I think what's great about what you're doing is that you're being able to go back in time and understand the time and place where people lived, and then see that kind of interconnectivity, that pattern of what happened there. And that's what I appreciate about the work that you're doing. I know that I can tell you that as a filmmaker, making these films called Patterns of Evidence, I have been trying to hear the different points of view. And I think the same is true with the work that you're doing, is that you're looking at the material culture and you're saying, first of all, what is it? What can we find? And then that opens it up for the rest of the world and all the other scholars to make their interpretations. But what I appreciate is that it also opens it up for us not to discount the historical influence that the Bible would have on that archaeological dig site. So that you can basically say, well, this is what the Bible says, and here's this pattern that I'm seeing. Whether it's at Jericho or at Shiloh or at Magdala or any place, you're seeing is it conflicting or not? And if it's not, then that's what we're seeing. And I've heard a number of people say that archaeology hasn't ever really discredited the Bible. There are archaeologists who have, but not necessarily the archaeology, because it's about interpretation. Well, anyway, I want to thank you for taking the time. You are a part of the Patterns of Evidence Foundation, has this community called Historical Faith Society, and we have probably close to almost 10,000 people that see these videos that when we send them out. And we're going to continue to explore archaeology in the Bible, and I'd like to know more about what Marcela is doing at Magdala, and I would like to know about anything that you guys are involved with. There's just a huge, hungry group of people out there that are interested in the preservation, the promotion, and the passing on the history of the Bible to the next generation. And that's what this is all about. And so I want to thank all of our viewers, our Historical Faith Society members, and any others that are a part of this for this great hour that we've been able to spend with you. So thank you again for doing this panel discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
You're welcome. God bless you.